Can you hear us and are you over 18?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
Awesome.
Okay.
And thank you for hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah, so do you believe in the Christian God?
Yes.
Okay, cool. What's your I guess this is kind of an open platform. So feel free to kind of share what you'd like, but I guess what's your primary reason for believing in the Christian God?
I would say I have several reasons, um, but I think that a big one would be, arguments, like philosophical arguments, like arguments from contingency. I think are very strong to demonstrate the existence of God through the lights of natural reason.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree that there's not a God, right? So I mean there could be like a kid, with a science experiment that has multiple universes in their lab, and we're like one planet within the universe that keeps expanding and contracting. I mean, I don't profess to see beyond the boundaries of the universe to know whether or not there's a God, but what's particularly compelling about the Christian God for you?
Well, so like the arguments for God's existence as they're typically elucidated by like Christian philosophers, or even the pagans like Aristotle or um, Plotinus, purport to terminate in a God who is not like the kid with the science experiment, but like as Aquinas would call like ipsum esse subsistens, subsistent existence itself, right? And so this is not a sort of fussy cause among other causes, but something that is radically different, whose very essence is to be, and would not be, and who's would have certain attributes that align with what like the Christian religion teaches.
What are some of the attributes that you would say that the Christian religion teaches that this God would have?
He's one. He's immutable, impassible, eternal. You know,
What does a mutable mean?
not subject to change.
Okay. Can we take that one for starters, and then we can go through the other attributes?
Okay.
Okay. Let's see if I can find some verses here. Um, okay.
Well, and just are we talking about God changing like as far as who he is as a being or like God changing his mind?
Yeah, you're saying God wouldn't like change his mind or anything, right? He doesn't change he wouldn't be like, I know everything, and then all of a sudden now I'm like changing my mind. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And I will also like anticipate, to the extent that we read the scriptures and we see instances that talk about God changing his mind.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that has, and this is not just me like kind of pulling it out of nowhere, a like ancient interpretation of this, and that has been kind of held from, so I'm a Catholic, and
Okay.
like the Catholic Church's understanding, which is by no means like a breakaway sect of Christianity. It's the primary section. It's the plurality
It's the
of
one that
Christians,
stuck. Yeah.
and
Thanks to Augustine and Theodosius, but go ahead.
they the way that this is interpreted is that as like Aquinas would talk about analogy, that human beings speak about God in analogous ways, but it is not to be understood that there is actual change in God's states, or like like changes in mental states of God, and that however we interpret these passages, they should not be interpreted in a way to say that God changes his mind in the sense that you or I do, but rather they describe a relation of human to God that is not exactly symmetrical or univocal.
So outside of like so to boil it down for the simple folk like me, I grew up on a small farm. You gotta hang with me here. So um so God doesn't change, right? He's immutable in that he doesn't change. And he also doesn't like change his mind where he's like, "You know what? I'm going to go ahead and make grass green." And then, 100 years later decide, "Man, that was a bad decision. I'm going to turn it blue." I mean, I guess he can change his mind. It's not that he can't change his mind, but you're saying that when he makes a decision, he's doing it because he knows the future. He's like omniscient. Is that where we're getting at?
No, frozen.
Oh, did
It's
it
still
freeze?
there? Maybe they got a connection issue.
Oh, darn it.
Hi, can you
Give
hear
them
me?
just a second.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Oh,
Yep, we
I
got
thought
you.
I
We
heard
got you.
something.
Sorry.
Yep. Oh, no,
Sorry
you're
about
good.
that.
You're good. You're good.
I don't know.
Yep, we got you
I'm
back.
not sure what you. I'm not sure what you heard, but basically,
Yeah, I basically
so
was asking
I
like
think
what does that mean exactly? Like he doesn't change his mind. So he doesn't like if he makes a decision because he knows the future, he knows the past, he knows everything. He's omniscient, I assume is another attribute.
yes.
He's not gonna like do something and then be like, oops, my bad. You
No, I
know.
mean that would be impossible as well because God exists eternally, right? So it's not as if God like experiences time in a sense that like you or I do. All points of time are ever present to him and an ever present now.
I look at it like as a bread loaf, right? So like he knows all the slices of the bread loaf all at once. Is that like a good analogy maybe? I mean it's different,
It's
right? But
a funny analogy. I don't see a problem with it on its face.
you're right.
Oh, with bread.
Yeah, that is good. So okay, so here would be my question then.
Okay.
So if God knows everything from like the beginning of time, because I assume you believe in ex nihilo, right? Like
Of
that
course.
there was nothing, and then there was you believe that there was nothing, and then there was
Of course.
time, and God was before the time. That's a traditional church father way to look at it.
Not to nitpick, but the question of before the time is an interesting statement.
Agreed.
It's interesting whether or not it makes sense to talk about this to talk about that. But I understand what you're meaning.
Yeah, and I'm tracking with you on that. So for example, and we can pull up the verses too. So if you ever say, I'm gonna fact check you on that, like we can pull up the verses. I'm gonna reference some of them for the like audience if they want to like pull them up as well. But I suspect that H knows his scripture
I
based
do
on.
too.
So God creates humanity. You
Yes.
know, he puts the snake in the garden, essentially with a bunch of kids because they don't know the difference between right and wrong. He knows they're going to pull the lever. Don't pull the lever. They're going to pull the lever, and they eat the fruit. They get cast into sin, right? Oop, it's you guys' fault. Original sin. And then down the road, sin happens, sin happens. Oop, the angels think that the women of men are hot, so they come down and they fornicate with the women of men. And now we've got like this whole situation where we've got to wipe off the scourge of the earth and have the flood. And it says God regretted creating man.
Mm-hmm.
So how
Right.
can God regret something when he knew it was going to happen?
Right. It's a good question. I think that an interpretive key has to be attendant to the literary genre that we're dealing with. We shouldn't approach any of the books of the Bible with this sort of a priori understanding that they are written in the sense that we would have written them were we to write something in the 21st century. We have to be, and I think that that's only fair, right? It's not fair to assume that any of these books of the Bible were written as if they were meant to be like a court transcript of events necessarily, right?
So God didn't write them?
No, God wrote them. The human authors also wrote them. What I'm meaning to say is that we have to be attendant to the particular literary genre in which they were written. And like I would say that in that the authors of Scripture use modes of language that are particular to the cultural circumstances that they're in and the literary genre in which they're writing to describe God in a way that is intelligible, but not always in with a sense of like it's difficult to describe, but this is kind of the point I was getting at earlier, which is however we interpret the scriptures, we have to interpret them understanding that they are under the context of God being immutable. So, to the extent that they're saying that God regrets something, whatever it means, it doesn't mean that there's some sort of like a change in God's state. And I don't think that that's like an ad hoc, just get out of jail free card. I think that it follows naturally from what we can know about God, because we can know that God is immutable through the light of natural reason, because whatever ipsum esse subsistens is, it cannot be subject to change. And it also shouldn't surprise us that when humans try to write about God in these various literary modes, that they do so in a way that, relates them to each other. And like the goal of this is not necessarily to write like a theological textbook. in every instance, right? And I don't know if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking with you.
But the point is, like, I would say I think it's a mistake to really get like hung up on this stuff. And it's not just me who says this. Like, this is the rich tradition of like the church that, is in concert with what I'm saying, albeit more eloquently. And I would refer you to, and I don't know the exact name of it, but there are many, compendia of, treatises, like letters from popes or theologians that talk about this and the proper interpretation of scripture in the light of natural theology.
So interesting. And so for the audience, we do we don't want to lose the audience, H. So that's how I know you've read scripture, because you're using a lot of like church doctrine language that I grew up with. Not everyone knows all this stuff, but that's okay in terms of like the lingo. But what you're saying is, like, I would disagree with, because I think that all those fancy terms are basically ways that the church fathers, starting with Clement, right, all the way up to really got to give a shout out to Augustine. Love the dude. City of God was a peach. But you have books upon books upon books that can fill a tower. I mean, Origen, Tertullian, not Marcion, he's a heretic now, right? But all these church fathers arguing back and forth about all these little details to reconcile the fact that it just doesn't make sense. So, for example, like, you would say, let's not get hung up in the fact that, like, God knows everything, but he created mankind, and then it says that he forgot mankind. Well, that's just because it made the story better to say that he regretted it. So then what do you say about the fact that he made Saul king, and then he repents and says, I shouldn't have made Saul king? I mean, he does this constantly throughout the Old Testament, where he's constantly like, I do this, oops, I shouldn't have done that. Or the best, I'd pull up the verse just to like like flag it, right? But you would know what I'm doing, so I'm not going to do it out of respect. But like I think it's First Judges 1:19, where it's like God loses because of iron chariots. It's like, whoa, God didn't see that coming. I was going to beat him, but iron chariots. Now you could say, well, that's because we had to write the book in a way that the people would relate to it. But then at what point am I just like, how are you different than any other ancient mythology or book out there? I might as well become a Muslim and hit up this guy in the chat that's like talking about the Quran, because the Quran actually has stuff in there that is more scientific than the Old Testament. Like, how do we, if it was just written for a people, why do I believe in the Old Testament versus any other holy book? Especially because it took a mountain of literature to get to all the fancy words that you're trying to talk about.
Sure. So I would say a few things. I would say, admittedly, scriptural exegesis is not exactly, I would say, like my strong suit, and so this is one of the reasons why I kind of direct it towards those, people who I think have done a better job. I also, in particular, I think that Thomas Aquinas's treatise on the will of God that's found in the Summa Theologica could be particularly instructive here, and also maybe just kind of like a very simple illustration or idea is that if we're talking about a timeless being who has like a will for something at time A and a will for something at time B, it's not like appropriate to say that the will would I think I'm not sure it would be appropriate to say that the will, quote unquote, has changed in the sense from the perspective of the eternal being, right? It might appear that this is the case from the recipient of it. But the question of, well, why should we believe in the Old Testament in particular? I think that we should believe in the Old Testament because I think that we have good reason to believe in Jesus. But I don't want to get too like far afield of like, I think that to the extent that somebody doesn't believe in God, I do think it's important also to note that I do think that that God can be known to exist as a matter of certainty through the light of natural reason, right? We can reason from effect to cause and
But
know.
why the Christian God, though? Because I don't disagree. I can look outside and the trees are really perfect and the grass is amazing. And I could say, you know what? Maybe on another planet, the grass is blue and the trees don't have leaves, and their God wanted the trees not to have leaves and their grass to be blue. Or I could say, you know what? It had to be like this, therefore the watchmaker. But why is your watchmaker Yahweh that is full of holes in the Old Testament, a lot of contradictions, and then like how does it then end up in Jesus?
I would obviously object to the characterization of being full of holes, as you know, but I think that how does it, and I would also object to this. I think that even the description of it as being like, there's one God for this planet or one God for this other planet, evidence is like kind of like, and perhaps it's on my end, a failure to explain the idea that the idea of there being more than one of ipsum esse subsistens is not, you know, a coherent thing to say.
What does
There
ipsum esse obsistens mean?
ipsum esse subsistens is Latin for, how would you translate it? Subsistent existence itself. So this is what, this is what Aquinas would call God. And this is, in my opinion, similar to what you get from like Aristotelian contingency arguments. In general, there's an interesting question whether I think Plotinus, his description of the one, is arguably asymptotic to that. But I think that I don't like this idea that there's one God here, one God here. That doesn't really make sense. There's one. There could, like, the arguments purport to demonstrate, and I believe that they're successful, that there could only in principle be one God.
But why is it the Christian God?
But yeah, I think that's the point of the question here,
Mhm.
is how does the Bible and the apologetics that you're putting into, well, God isn't actually changing his mind, we shouldn't read it that way.
Mhm.
How is that any different than what any other faith is doing with their holy book?
Right, because if I talk to a Muslim, they're going to say Allah, and they're going to rattle off a bunch of things that you just said exactly the same way with their, traditions. And if I talk to a Hindu, they're going to say the exact same thing. They might have a few extra deities involved. I mean, now there is other religions that have been snuffed out over the years thanks to the sword, but they all said the same thing. They all had their traditions. Ours has been baked out for a while as Christianity, but at the same time, it's just gotten like just convoluted when you really boil it down to like the brass tacks. Not brass tacks in terms of like, is there a God? Because you know what? I can't prove that one way or another. I can't prove that there's a God or not. I don't think anyone really can,
Well,
unless
that's
you can
exactly the
step
point,
outside the universe.
right? No,
But I
Yeah.
can prove that the Christian God is completely not real because
Right.
the Bible is so full of scientific errors, failed prophecies, contradictions, narrative contradictions, anachronisms, and just historical fallacies that there is no way that the Christian God's real. I would buy the Mormon God's real at this point over the Christian God. But then you got to tack the Old Testament and New Testament to that, and now I can't believe that one either. So, anyways, maybe I just need to talk to this Muslim guy. But anyways, convince me about Christianity.
Right. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot there of what you said.
Yeah,
I think
that went a lot of
per-
places.
Sorry.
So.
I mean, first of
Feel
all,
free to
I-
take
I-
one point.
Yeah.
I would say that I strenuously disagree with the characterization that you can't know unless you step outside of the universe. That's actually precisely the opposite of what I am saying. I am saying that, like, agnosticism, or said differently, the epistemological position that the existence of God is unknowable, is false. That's false. And it's false because we can reason from effects in the world to cause, right? So, like,
Okay, so God's real. Next point.
Okay, so then the question is, of course, well, has he revealed himself? And I think that the person of Jesus, I think that there's good evidence from the historical record to support the central claims of Christianity, namely that Jesus existed, that he died, that he resurrected.
Nope,
And
he didn't resurrect. What's the evidence that he resurrected?
So I think that to limit it to, okay. So
What's the
let's say,
reasoning? Let's say you can't provide
Yeah,
evidence.
because
What's
here's
the
the
reasoning?
thing, and I just want to break this down a little bit because
Mhm.
I'm I'm not a mythicist, so I could 100% be on board with the idea that Jesus was born, he lived a life, and to be quite honest, that he was crucified because people were being crucified all the time. The
Sure.
part that is like a little bit harder to swallow is someone coming back from the dead.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a very, I mean, it's a miraculous claim, right? It's an extraordinary claim. And so I would say, I think that, I'm not an expert of this history. That's not my profession. But I think that if we look at like what even secular atheistic historians of this era would accept, you know, a consensus or a large majority of uh, historians of this era would accept the claims that Jesus was crucified. They would accept the claim that he was buried in a tomb.
Yeah, I don't know about that tomb part, but
So I don't mean
usually it was mass graves.
I don't mean to say like literally everybody, but I would say that from my survey of the evidence, I can only speak to my own research and my own
Mhm.
investigation. So I'm just telling you
Yeah.
from my investigation, it seems to me that like I would say significantly more than 50% of historians of this era. There are of course people like John Dominic Crossan who would say that Jesus was buried in a mass grave. There are people like Bart Ehrman who would say that Jesus's tomb may not have been found empty. I bring up those two people to demonstrate that there are people who are not quacks, who are credentialed historians who would disagree, but they would
And there is
also.
one other one that I actually would throw out there too, and this is in your favor. So, like, there's Dr. James Tabor who believes that Jesus was put in a tomb, but if you remember, it was a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea that was
Mm,
supposed to be for his family, and it was done in haste, and it was a temporary tomb. So, an argument could be made that Jesus was hastily put in a temporary tomb by a rich guy whose tomb was cement for his family, so that by the time the people came back that next morning to put spices on Jesus's body, the body had been moved to its permanent location, in fact showing that it was empty and freaking everyone out, and all of a sudden starting this new cult. I mean, that's another
mm.
thought process as well.
No, I hear what you're saying, but just to complete my kind of my kind of
Please.
thought processes, you know, the I it is my the fruits of my investigation have shown to me that substantially more than 50%, and in some of these instances, I would say like substantially more than 90% of the credentialed historians of this period would agree that Jesus was crucified, that he was placed in the tomb, that tomb was found empty, and that he was seen, that his followers believed
His followers
that.
claimed to see him.
Well, more than that they believed that they saw him, not merely that they claimed. So then the reason I phrase it that way is to as if like it's not like made up. Maybe they were mistaken. You might say that they hallucinated or something like that, but it would preclude the theory of like a conspiracy. Um,
Right. But
and
how many people claim to see Nero risen from the dead?
I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is that there did not become a belief, like an enduring cult that claimed that this man had been resurrected in the sense that
But they did go to
Jesus
war and
was.
die for him, convinced that he was risen.
Yeah, I've heard of this. I don't know all of the history with respect to the Nero thing, but just like to bring it back to the claims of Jesus specifically.
But it's
Um,
relevant though, right? Because it's very similar. I mean, there's 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 not a lot of times where a religious figure dies and comes back from the dead, but it's not unheard of. In fact, there's it's 1600 CE. There was the Jewish leader who had followers all across Europe, and he was everyone was following him, believing him as the Messiah. I'll have to pull up the name, but it's because I'm gonna butcher it if I say it out
yeah,
loud, and it's gonna
sure.
be embarrassing.
I hear what
And
you're
you see what
saying,
I'm
and I
saying?
Yeah,
There,
yeah.
I
there's
well I
there's
also haven't.
parallels.
No,
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying, and I
yeah.
would say that I don't have all. I remember having looked into something like this myself, and I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember my conclusion coming away from that the claims surrounding Jesus were qualitatively different from contemporaneous or like similar like claims of like seeing a vision of like a raised
Were
person.
you
And I
raised
and
Christian?
no, and so I think that I was an atheist, and then I converted when I was in my early 20s. And I think, to me, and then there's other pieces of like evidence. I think with particularly like the Catholic Church, with respect to Eucharistic miracles, that like even in the 20th century, there are dozens of examples throughout history where the Eucharist has, upon consecration, changed in appearance and then been tested by secular scientists and
Hmm.
shown to be human heart tissue. And
Yeah,
that's
I'm gonna
and
have
that's
to
not what.
call
That,
Snopes on that one. But if the chat
no,
wants to double check it,
I
that's fair.
promise. I
I'm gonna
very
make
much
a note
encourage
of it to I'm gonna make a note on it to research because I could be wrong.
Lanciano, Sokolka, Poland. Look
Because
in
I think
it happened
I've
in
heard a
Buenos
lot of these
Aires.
things from like a Hindu perspective as well. There's miracles all over the world from all different religions. Hell, Asclepius got to have his own temples and become deified because he was healing people. And then if you slept in the temple of Asclepius, you would be healed. Like this has gone back since the beginning of
Well,
time of faith
and the
healers and
reason.
miracles. It's all personal
Okay.
experience and
What
kind
a
of
Well,
hearsay.
and that's not right. And the reason that it's not right is the following, because I'm not talking about like what I'm talking about is, and one of the there are like thousands of anecdotal like reports of people having been healed, whether it be at like Lourdes or other sites of various Marian apparitions. But the thing that's I find particularly um, interesting and compelling about the Eucharistic miracles is first of all, some of them are recent. Some of them are in like the first millennium, but some of them are like one of them happened in Argentina when now the late Pope Francis was Cardinal and Bishop of Buenos Aires, right? So this is not like ancient history, and these have been subject to like independent scientific investigation, right? Like people who did not know what the samples were.
Can you give me some of the studies and the peer reviews on this?
So yeah, so I would a good kind of like source of like a list of these. If you just like search like Carlo Acutis, Acutis, he's a recently canonized saint.
Saint Carlo Acutis. Okay.
Yes, and if you go, he had I think it's called like it's in Italian. I think it's like Miraculo Eucharistici or something. There's a website of his.
Okay, and this is peer reviewed scientifically?
So the how do I phrase this correctly? What he does is he has summaries on his website, and I believe that there are either like you can look at like summaries and then you could from there kind of jump from that to go to more in depth. It's the format of the website. The reason I recommend it is it kind of has like a lot of them there, and you can kind of get a feel for what the claims are. But if you want
So I
like more like
apologize to any
more like white,
Protestants on the chat right now that disagree with this, but keep going.
but if you want like any more like white papery stuff, I you would probably have to go like do further research. But I think it's like a good
All this
read.
seems very Catholically peer reviewed. I'm on it right now.
Well, without question, obviously, it draws the interest of Catholics. But I would say that what you can see, and I also, to be fair, I have not looked at every single line item on that website, right? But I would say that, like, what you would notice if you investigate some of these is that these were the scientists who were involved in the investigation. Some of them were Catholic and some of them were not. And interestingly, typically, or at least often, they did not know what they were being shown. And like, so, I think that and this hasn't happened once or twice or three times or four times or five times or six times or seven times or eight times or nine times or 10 times, right? Like this is a like relatively frequent phenomenon.
So what about the exact same thing, okay, except for it's spiritual leader Sai Baba. It was Sathya Sai Baba. He was a Hindu healer, and he has eyewitnesses of his healings, and he has eyewitnesses of his own healing, almost like a resurrection type thing, but he didn't actually die and resurrect. Unfortunately, he died and stayed dead. But he did heal himself, and he also healed other people. And there's like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of eyewitnesses of all of this. Like, why is his fake? And this, he died in 2011, so 1940 to 2011. Why is his fake? And this Catholic Reviewed Eucharistic miracle guy with all these Eucharistic miracles, which, by the way, I'm from a Protestant, and I did not believe that the wine turned to blood in my tummy, and I also didn't believe that
Well, it doesn't turn in your tummy; it turns before you drink it.
Okay, well, whatever. I didn't believe I was drinking blood and eating flesh. Now, neither here nor there. I'm going to split the Christians in the audience. You can put a 1 in the chat if you think that you've got skin in your tummy after you have the wafer. But what makes that one fake and yours real? And you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the difference?
Right. I mean, fair question. And I'll admit, I haven't investigated every single miracle claim in Christianity.
Nor could you. I mean, that's not a
elsewhere. So
so I'm just asking generally.
You can pull out. I'm there's like
but I think that's kind of
another
the
one would be
point
like
of the question.
Simon Kimbungu in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or something like that. And so what I would say is that without making a comment as to any of the particular examples that you've given, it's my understanding that the Catholic Church teaches of the possibility of God having, like, God cares about all people. And I don't think that the mere fact that there could be, that God could work a miracle in a context that is not like Catholic, for example, is not in itself, to my knowledge, like something that is like considered to be impossible. And so the short answer is I don't know. I don't know. I would look at the evidence and I can't really comment on something that I don't know, but also like, yeah, so I can't really comment on something like that I don't know. All what I can say though is that in the particular example of Jesus, I do find that looking at the available historical evidence, it does seem to me that the best explanation for that evidence is what the earliest Christians claimed happened, namely that this man rose from the dead.
So
and I think that the competing
the
explanations do not have adequate explanatory value.
That's super. No, and by the way, you're doing a great job. I'm tracking with you. Some of the terms that you were using initially, like I just struggled with like understanding what you were saying, but now I'm tracking with you. I appreciate that, and you're very well spoken, and I also think that you're representing very well. And I appreciate you saying when you don't know something. I will say I don't know when a term you say I don't know, I don't know what it means, but going back to the fact that you said, like at the very beginning, you were like, okay, well, God has these attributes, right? Okay. So we first talked about the fact that, like, okay, we just took the top one, right? Omniscience, right? So God knows everything. We wrote off the fact that God did things that he later regretted because it's a book. And it's like, we're trying to write to the people and we have to put it in terms that they'll understand or relate to. And tell me if I'm misspeaking. I'm trying
to be honest, I don't exactly know how to articulate it. I'm trying to imagine if I'm 4,000 years ago and I'm we're writing in the modes of language, how do you describe if, God, who is timeless, wanted for me at point A something and then wanted for me something, 2 years later, something different? How would we describe this? And I think the point is, like, I think that this is maybe just like a different sort of hermeneutical approach to scripture from Protestants and Catholics, is that, I think an error that fundamentalist Protestants make with the Bible, and I think that I don't know what your religious background is, but like I think that some ex-fundamentalist Protestants make an analogous error, which is that they read into the Bible an intention that's not there, which is that that they assume that the intention of the author is to write a narrative in the literary genre that we would write the same story in the 21st century. And I just think that that's wrong. It can't be right? Like they may not have had that genre back then. And so the point is, like, I don't really typically get hung up on these things because I think
how do you know what's true then? So like, let's take an example. So for example, do you believe it's the verse that everyone knows? 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast. I'm just going off the
Yes.
top of my head here. I actually got
Sure.
for my notes.
Endures all
But
things.
do you believe that? Is that what love is? Is that what God is? Is God love?
God is love. Yes.
Okay. So let's take love is patient as just one, like a one-off, for example, and let's look at like examples. And you know what I'm doing here. You're an intelligent person. You know what I'm going to do? Hold on. I'm going to pull up, remove that. Whoops. If I can. Oh boy. Share screen. Maybe.
I don't see it up there.
Oh, there we go. Share screen. I think it's, here we go. So, okay. So, we are saying that
No, you still have to get it on the screen, baby.
yeah, I will. 1 second. Here we go. Okay. So God is love. I will make this bigger. 1 second, everybody. So God is love, and it says
Right, and I can't see
you
the
kind of
screen,
get where I'm going.
but
I'm gonna make it bigger.
I understand, but
Yeah,
to
head
be
me off
honest
the
with you,
path here. Go ahead.
I don't really consider. I understand that perhaps there's like a potential gotcha moment coming up, and I don't.
No,
I
let's
just,
talk
like, I don't.
holistically. No
I
gotcha
don't
moment.
consider. I
Why
don't
is
consider it to be
Jesus impatient?
scandalous.
Why is God impatient when it says that love is patient? And I
Right.
can go and I can list the 6 verses for people that haven't read the Bible, because unlike you and I, a lot of people haven't. But there's multiple times where Jesus is super impatient, where God is super impatient, but then Paul says, love is patient, love is kind, God is love. Help us understand that.
Yeah, sure. I haven't heard this specific question articulated before. And so,
That's fair.
I would want to give it some thought. I feel confident that there is a way to describe this, because I think that like an analogy that comes off the top of my head is like my father is a patient person, but I'm sure that there have been times when he got impatient with me.
But
You
your
know what I
dad is
mean?
not
Like,
Is your
equivalent
dad
with God.
God?
no, that's not what I'm saying. My point is that I think that like two things can be true at once. Like if I were to say, for example, that my dad is a patient person, my dad is patient, let's say. And then if somebody were to come up with a counterexample that said, well, what about this one time when your dad was not patient? Would that ipso facto be a counterexample to
I'm
my
listing
claim?
like so
Properly
far 3
understood.
times, just 3 times right now in the text, and we only have a limited amount of text. Go ahead.
Mhm. Right.
I do think
But
that sorry, and I'm not trying to talk over you. But I do want to pause, because I do think my question was relevant when I said you're comparing God to your father. We would expect that a human can't be patient all the time. But if we're having an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present God, we would hold them to a different standard.
Especially
And
if they can
especially if
torch
these
us.
are the attributes we're giving to them, I don't think that we should be able to say, oh, but it's just like, yes, I'm a loving person, but sometimes I fight with my husband.
right. No, I completely understand what you're saying. I will say, like I said, biblical exegesis is not especially my strong suit. I am sure that there are a host of competent exegetes who have tackled this this topic, and I would refer you to them, because this is not something where I don't feel scandalized by this, because I imagine that there's a perfectly sensible explanation, because it seems to me like maybe it has to do with the context in which Paul is speaking, that he's talking about love in the sense of like spousal love or friend or fraternal love, or filial love, and not specifically making some sort of ontological theological claim about the inner life of the triune God, right? I don't know. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's something else.
Can I
any
ask you a
case,
question?
I just don't really know off the top of my head. And so I would just, like I said, and to be honest with you, like this is your show. I'm not going to steer the ship for you, but I will say, like, the Bible's not really like my area of expertise. And so if I don't really feel like I don't really feel like I'm the person to ask about that, I would refer out.
So here's what I would say. And first of all, H, mad respect for you, because you came in You got me on my
You
heels.
definitely have knowledge.
You got me on my heels because the reason why you got me on my heels was because of the confidence you came in. You came in like popping off words. I love exegesis. I like just to say exegesis. But the thing that's interesting to me is this. Okay. If I were to show you a bunch of moments in the Bible where so first of all you have to give me a truth. Okay? That's where we got to start. You've got to be able to give me a truth. And if your truth is that God is all-knowing, okay? And I could show you in the Bible, let's just back off that because you said all-knowing doesn't count because God had to write it to a bunch of dummies. So he had to downplay it and put it into a context that we could understand. Okay, fair. So he pretended that he wasn't all-knowing. Fair. Let's say though that you believe in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is patient, love is kind, love is not boastful, blah blah blah. Let's say I could show you let's say I could give you 30 times when the God of the Bible and Jesus did not demonstrate those things and in fact was the antithesis of those things. And then I could show you the verse where it says God is love. Now, would that be enough if you went to your apologetics and you couldn't find a definitive reason to refute that? So you went to your exegesis captains and your apologetics, and they couldn't come up with a solid reason to refute those 30 things that I can show you. Would you have a crack in your faith?
I think that my faith is founded on the principles that I had already kind of elucidated among others.
So you're saying it wouldn't
and
matter?
I'm not. That's not what I said.
But
what I'm saying,
what are you saying? Would it matter or would it not matter?
I think I would take all sort of data points, and it's kind of difficult to imagine. If you imagine like you feel like you have lots of good reasons to believe something, and then hypothetically imagine let's say I had 10 reasons to believe, right? And then something like this 11th thing comes in that if true would, I have 10 reasons to believe proposition X, and then point 11 comes in, and if point 11 is true, then X is not true. Okay, well then what do you do? Well, if each of those 10 points is in itself sufficient to believe in proposition X, and all 10 of those appear to be true, and then point 11 comes in, and point 11, if true, would demonstrate that X is not true. Well, what do? It means that you need to go back and you need to kind of like reanalyze and try and understand.
You'll never come up with a real answer that way. What you'll do is you'll continue to try to prove point 11, and then what'll happen is the exact same thing that happened to me for decades, where you'll have 10 solid points, and then point 11 will be irrefutably wrong, and then you will find every way to bend your way into a belief in point 11 in an exegesis that makes sense to you through apologetics, and then you'll tuck it under the rug until you get to the next 11th point. And over time, what will happen is you'll continue to surmount the 11th point, and you'll live your whole life believing in something that, in my opinion, isn't necessarily true. You have to be able to determine, is this true or is this not true? And if you come across something that is different than what you believe, the first thing you should not do is run to your echo chamber. So if I come across something that's an opposing view, I don't run to my exegesis like you said you were going to do, or run to my apologetics. I want to find out, whoa, this is a problem. If there are 30 things that disagree with 1 Corinthians 13, this is a major issue. Like, I would dive down that and try to find the opposite view, if that makes sense.
No, I think that truth cannot contradict truth. And if the faith is true, then we should fear no questions, right? It's perhaps I'm not explaining myself well, and to that extent, I apologize. But my point is merely that I think that all I'm trying to say is that all is not really anything different than what we all do all of the time, which is we all have like various reasons for believing the things that we believe. And, to the extent that there's apparently contradictory evidence that undermines something that we believe we have strong reasons for believing, it's not necessarily epistemologically sound, and therefore like, oh, I must abandon that which is before. And I would also say like, a lot of my hesitation comes from, I would say that like, although when I have like encountered analogous issues in the past where I've looked into scripture and things, I see a difficulty in scripture, a pattern has emerged where upon thought and reflection that I feel comfortable that there's like a suitable explanation. And when it comes to things, and in particular, when it comes to things like the descriptions of God in human language and anthropomorphic language, I feel like, like God is sometimes, the things are talked about like the wrath of God, right? But I think, or like God's impatience, right? That's as you elucidated. Maybe it's, God is patient, but he deals with sin in an oppressing way, right? And so when you have human beings who are talking about God in anthropomorphic language, I don't really feel like, I think that from like a literary genre perspective, there's like a fair amount of like, I think it sounds to me like the criticism that you're giving is based upon a kind of literalistic, fundamentalistic reading of the Bible, which I don't think is correct. But like I said, like I'm not a Bible scholar, but what I mean to say is like I don't really fear any questions. If somebody were to give me evidence that were, contradictory to my faith, of course, I would be willing to listen to what they had to say because, I'm interested in the truth, right? I'm interested in the truth.
So first of all, mad respect, H. You are definitely. Please come back. You were excellent to debate with. I would love to know like the next time you come back. I know like you kind of came in on the premise that like God exists, which we'll definitely grant you that. We definitely obviously we both believe that like Jesus was a real person. I think we both believe that he died on the cross.
I don't see any reason not to.
Exactly. I mean, and I would be interested to know, and I know we got some other folks that are wanting to join up here, but like, I would be interested to know what your like primary, I guess, how do I say this? Like the core truths, because to me, the thing that I was struggling with is trying to understand like, because I can say, you know what, I believe in Shakra-La. Well, what's Shakra-La? Well, man, it's like this feeling I get, and there's this book, and it says all the right things. Or I could say, I believe in Epictetus's philosophy. It's all about equality. It's about love. It's like blah blah blah. It like helps
Stoicism
my
is cooked.
life. Yeah, it's like so. It's kind of like one of those things where it's like what I'm interested in is like okay, but what's like the core thing that one difference differentiates Christianity from the different
I
religions
see.
because
Okay.
and
Well,
then
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no. Yeah, like one, what's the primary differentiator? What's the core thing that you hold as true to that differentiator and why? And we are not here to necessarily um disprove that by any stretch, but what
But
but
to
what we
understand it.
like to do is we like to kind of push back on like, well, why is that the case? Because like we don't believe anymore because
Right.
we think it's silly. Like we got to the
I
point where
understand.
we like I was an
I
apologist,
used to I
yes,
used to think it was silly too.
and I get it. We flipped spots. See, the universe is balanced. It's like the force is equal now. Um,
Well, if I can answer I don't want to take up too much of your time, and
No,
if you
you're
no,
good.
want
you're
me
good. We've
to
got
leave,
some people joining,
but
but they haven't popped in the
I'll
box
just
yet. By the
I'll
way,
just
I know
very
if you guys because some people popped in the box and then they jumped out because we were going. But if someone pops in, we'll definitely respect them as well. But definitely H continue because you've
yeah.
been fantastic. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with me. And so, just to kind of briefly sketch, um, you know, I was an atheist, um, and then I started to encounter arguments for the existence of God that I found to be compelling. I obviously think that various arguments have varying degrees of strength, but I came to be convinced philosophically from the arguments of like Aristotelian and Thomistic philosophy, in particular contingency arguments, cosmological contingency arguments that argue in particular that an infinite, essentially ordered causal series of causes cannot in principle regress indefinitely, but has to terminate in a cause that is a sufficient explanation for its own existence. And that this is what Aquinas would call God, this is what Aristotle would call God, and that this is something that is demonstrable through the light of natural reason alone. It's like analogous to if you see your computer and your computer is charging, it's plugged in, but your charger is going around a corner so you can't see where it's plugged in. You know that it must be plugged into something. It can't go on forever. It can't be plugged into itself. You can see the effect and reason backwards to the cause and know from looking at the effect that this is the kind of effect that could only in principle exist because it only has causal power in a derivative sense, right? So I became convinced by arguments of that ilk. And then my question was, okay, well, goodness, okay, maybe now I believe in God. Well, has God revealed himself? And so I tried, that argument set that I elucidated limits oneself to monotheism philosophically. So I looked at various monotheistic traditions, Christianity, Islam, Jainism is arguably monotheistic, or not Jainism, Sikhism, Judaism. And then I thought,
and just so you know, we did get Edgar in the chat. We will bring you up, Edgar, but I do want to let H finish.
And I'll close it out.
I do want you to finish, H. But I just wanted Edgar to make sure he might have just popped up.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, he made a comment that he wanted to come up because it wasn't fair that we're 2 versus 1, and he wanted us to bring him up at the same time. We can't really do that because
it's okay. I also need to work tomorrow, so yeah, I should probably
also fair.
We're not trying to gang up on anybody, but when we try to bring people up at the same time, the audio is a mess, so we just can't really do that.
And we do take turns. We don't gang up. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no. But and then I basically tried to investigate to the best that I can as like a layman with an IQ above room temperature, just like trying to is there any evidence that any of these religions which make various claims about God, or is there any evidence that they're true? And I looked into the historical evidence for like the resurrection of Jesus, for example. And it is my honest opinion that from a purely we're just trying to explain what happened in history, I really do think the best evidence of the facts are that he did rise from the dead. I really do. And I think then I also think that there, like I said, there's the Eucharistic miracles. There's miracles. There's the miracle of the sun in Portugal at Fatima, which you may have heard of, and lots of others. And then it's kind of what some people call the illative sense, this kind of accumulating set of data that kind of creates this mosaic of coherency in my mind, that when there are multiple points of evidence that I think that you might argue are sufficient reasons to believe, but then when they congregate into this mosaic, it creates this kind of clarity of vision that to me brings me great confidence that Catholicism is true.
Well, I hugely respect that. Definitely subscribe, because H, we would love to have you come back. You definitely challenged us on some great points.
Well, maybe we could talk more about miracles.
And we'd love to get more into it. I'm going to definitely do some homework on some miracles too. But we are going to bring up Edgar, and thank you so much, H. I really appreciate you coming on board.